Okay, this is lecture 4 of Guelzo's Reconstruction, chapters 4 and 5. We're going to begin with the 1868 election. As we know, 1868 is presidential election year because Abraham Lincoln was elected in 64. Andrew Johnson is filling his term, but Andrew Johnson has worn out his welcome with the Republican Party. They tried to impeach him, and he survived impeachment, and he does not have a home in the Democratic Party. So 1868, the Republicans run their number one choice, which is Ulysses S. Grant. And Grant runs on a program of we're going to continue Reconstruction. He supports the ideas that the radical Republicans are proposing. And so Grant wins the election, aided in no small part by the fact that the 1866 or 66 election returned a bunch of radical Democrats who disenfranchised a percentage of the white population in the South. I'm going to pause right here while I get my notes ready. So, okay, sorry about that. Forgot to put the memory stick in. Now I have it. Let's get it on the screen. Okay, so 1868, Grant wins the election, and he vows to continue Reconstruction. In the South, there's a new entity, the Republican Party in the South. This is comprised of three parts. The freedmen population, for obvious reasons, the freed slave population, known as the freedmen. Only men could vote, but now it is legal for them to vote under the Reconstruction Act of 1867, which will be continued or further validated with the passage of the 15th Amendment to the Constitution. So freedmen population comprise a major part of the Republican Party in the South. They're joined by what are pejoratively called carpetbaggers. These are Northerners who come to the South. The white Southerners consider them interlopers. They consider them no good nicks. They consider them people coming down there to exploit the unfortunate position of Southerners. And so the insulting term carpetbaggers refers to the fact that they suggested that they were so poor and of such low means that they didn't even have regular suitcases. They could carry their life's possessions in a rolled up piece of carpet. So they're called carpetbaggers. It's an insult. They comprise part of the Southern Republican Party, and they are joined by white Southerners who join the Republican Party in this effort, and they also are known by the insulting term by other white Southerners, calling them scalawags. They're considered traitors to the South, traitors to their state, traitors to the region, and most of all, traitors to the white race. So you have a Republican Party in the South, which is brand new, and it's comprised of these three elements, and they are having outsized political power, both because of their expanded numbers and because a section of the white population who are Democrats are disenfranchised. And so we have the creation of Republican governments in the South. And one of the things Republican governments in the South is have to pick up things that were not being done before. There's a number of criticisms about Reconstruction governments, about their corruption and things of that nature and excessive taxation. And that's absolutely true. The Southern Republican governments are corrupt, but that's because American politics in general was remarkably corrupt. And it ignores the fact that before the war, the white Southern Democratic governments were remarkably corrupt as well. They ran the system to benefit themselves. So now we have a Republican government, and the system that was being run by these white Southern Democrats prior to the war is one that was dominated by large slave-owning plantation owners, the planter class, the folks that Andrew Johnson hated, who he called this slaveocracy. These folks ran the government to benefit themselves. One thing they ran to benefit themselves is that they provided almost no money in taxes because why should we pay taxes? We run the government. That was the general sentiment of the pre-Civil War ruling order. Well, now there's a new set of people in power, the Republican Party, and they represent different constituencies. So things that the white Southern class, the planter class did not think was their responsibility to provide funding for, things such as public health, things such as providing and acquiring fresh water, things such as providing public schooling to students. And the white Southern mentality schooling was something that was a private function. There was no role for public schooling, and certainly not my tax dollars paying for your child to be educated, right? So now we have a new ruling order in which, by law, the slave population had been kept illiterate. Now they're working hard to gain literacy, and so this requires funding for public schools, and they're going to generate this money from taxing people in the South, right? And who do you tax? Well, people who own property and have money, right? There's no point in taxing the poor who have no money because they can't pay their taxes. So you now have a tax burden that falls upon landowners, which unsurprisingly were the folks who exempted themselves previously from paying taxes. So these taxes are falling on these people, and they're to fund things that the Republican Party in the South believes government should do. They believe in public health. My particular research background is in issues that touch upon public health. Public health in the American South was a disaster. Sewerage and fresh water were in atrocious conditions, mainly because this was not seen as a responsibility of local governments, because that would cost money and they didn't want to tax themselves for that. So now you have parties put in a party put in the position of power, and they're going to create freshwater systems. They're going to clean up sewage systems. They're going to build schools that are funded with taxpayer dollars. They're going to collect taxes on things that were never taxed before. And so all these things are about what the Republican government's doing, and they're doing it with an intent. They have a pie-eyed vision of what they're going to achieve, and what they hope to achieve is a new industrial South, one that no longer is reliant upon large-scale rural production in the form of export crops such as cotton and tobacco and sugar. Instead, they're aspiring to create a new industrial South modeled on the industry of the northern states, right? So this is the ambitious dream of Republican governments, and one component of this creating this new modern industrial world is rapidly expanding in railroads. So there's a lot of support for Republican governments to do so. It does not turn out so well, as we shall see. So here in the South, unfortunately, the dreams of the Republican Party in the South were not achieved. They did not create a modern industrial economy. Instead, the economy reverted back to fundamentally the same type of economy we saw before, talking about the sharecropper population. These are people and crop lien and tenancy folks who are working on the property owned by the white slaveocracy, now former slaveocracy, the white planter class. They own the property, and the laborers have their strong backs. And so they negotiated this compromise. Again, this was a true compromise. Neither side was happy, and it was not set up to become what it became, right? It became a system of labor and debt peonage. And that's because the advantages reside with the landowner. The landowner has greater resources to sustain himself during bad times. So if there's a drought, although it's going to hurt the landowner and his pocket, he has the resources to withstand that. Where the tenants who have no resources, they go into debt to start each planting year, and their debt continues to accrue. So if they can't sell the product, their debt remains. And so this abundance of unequal distribution and the abundance of labor, right? So in the South, there wasn't the creation of this modern industrial economy. It was still a rural economy. And so the laboring class, the laborers had to sign contracts to work on these plantations, and there's a lot of labor, so labor is cheap. So landowners have that advantage. The product they are producing is in high demand. It had been in tremendous demand before. The major product of the South was cotton. In fact, the Southerners were so confident that King Cotton, as they referred to it, would give them advantages that they did not think that the Union would fail to accommodate their interests prior to the war. They relied upon King Cotton because this industrializing economy, a global industrializing economy, was sucking up this cotton to produce clothing on the large scale. And the overwhelming majority of this cotton was produced in the American South. After the war, there was this huge pent-up demand for cotton. It should be noted that during the war, places like Britain and France and Germany had begun to acquire new places to produce cotton. So Egyptian cotton began to grow as market share. Cotton in India, after the British destroyed the domestic Indian cotton production system and installed under their colonial powers the mandate that India produces export raw material cotton for English mills, Indians' cotton began to become an increasing percentage. But there's still huge demand for cotton grown in the American South. Cotton that was not able to get on the market during the war because of the Union blockade. So there's huge demand, which means this product is valuable. And so the landowners begin to make back some of their fortunes. They're also able to leverage their position to further force the laboring class, the workers, the freedmen, the sharecroppers, the folks working on the plantation into economic debt. And one of those tools is a term that's borrowed from mining companies, and it's known as the company store, because this is a rural economy. There's not many places you could shop if you live on the farm. Pretty much the only place you're going to get it is the store owned by the landowner. And so he sells those products at a very high rate. This increases the debt because the laborers have no income. They're waiting for the crop to come in, but in the meantime, they have to feed themselves and their family. And so these advantages allow the landowner to ensnare the workers in debt that is made inheritable. So when your father dies working in the sharecrop fields, you inherit your father's debt to the landowner. And so in this system, you create a type of labor control that functions under the notion of debt as opposed to being owned as property, right? So you're owned by your debt. It's illegal to walk away from your debt. They'll arrest you and throw you into prison, where you will then be hired out on a chain gang to work on plantation. So this is a system that insidiously ensnares laborers, freedmen and poor whites, because the destruction of the South in the aftermath of the war and the difficulty of restarting meant that many poor white landowners were unable to maintain control of their land, and so were reduced to selling their labor as well. So sharecroppers become white and black, marked by their impoverished status. In addition, the South throughout this period of Reconstruction has been resistant to efforts to reconstruct. We shall not be reconstructed, they would say. And so one of the forms of this Southern resistance comes in the form of the Klan, the Ku Klux Klan. There are a few other marginal groups that arise, but they're driven by the same idea. The Klan sees itself as the maintainers of the status quo as it was before the war. So and this is an important distinction, because before, control of the black population was based upon the law. The black population in the South was property. They weren't seen as people in the eyes of the court. And so as property, one can control one's property using the force of the state. Now, with the results of the American Civil War and the passage of the 13th Amendment, slavery is abolished. And so the Klan can't, or the intent of whites to maintain control as they see it over the black population can no longer be enforced by the state, especially after those special 1865 elections were thrown out. They can no longer rely upon legal mechanisms, and so they develop what's known as extra-legal mechanisms. And that premier extra-legal mechanism is the Klan. They terrorize the freedmen and Republicans to maintain control in the South. They enforce what they see as conventions, and you see some of the bitter comments from the white Southern population in saying how the black population doesn't treat them with the respect that they deserve and which they had before the war. So somebody who formerly would have to get out of the sidewalk when a white person walked down, why they don't walk down, they don't get out of the sidewalk, or they won't doff their hat to me as I walk by, or most insulting of all, they look me dead in the eye, right? These are things that were the conventions of slavery that the white population wants to maintain, but they can't use the law anymore. So now there's an extra legal thing known as the Klan. And this Klan activity is ratcheting up in violence and in volume. And the problem in the American South during this time is that the Klan activity, which is illegal because they are beating and murdering people in the South, is not being prosecuted by state and local authorities. They're rarely arrested, and when they are arrested, there's not a jury in the region that will convict them. This is creating additional tensions that are resolved by Ulysses S. Grant, who backs the passage of a series of anti-Klan laws that were passed, whoops, that's 1870, not 1970, sorry, 1870 and 71. These anti-Klan laws function to federalize crimes. So the crimes, the most potent and dangerous of which was lynching, these crimes are designed to intimidate the Black population. Because the Klan members are not being prosecuted, Ulysses S. Grant fosters the passage of anti-Klan laws which turn these violations of people's rights, including murder, into federal crimes. So instead of going before the local county judge and jury or the local state judge and jury, they go before federal prosecutors and federal judges and are heard by federal juries who begin to convict these people. Now, there's not a large number of people who are convicted under the passage of these anti-Klan laws, but they do demonstrate the support of the federal government for this effort. And one of the things that Klan violence relies upon is that nobody gets caught and gets sent to prison. When people begin to get caught and sent to prison, it begins to strike fear into the Klan members as opposed to them striking fear into the freedmen and Republican population, right? So the success of this effort, putting the federal government with using, in this case, the Union Army still remaining in the South to enforce these things, to arrest people and bring them to federal courts and federal trials, using U.S. Marshals to do so. This is a manifestly good thing for Reconstruction, because those who are seeking to inflict misery on the freedmen and Republicans are being punished for their extra legal violence outside the law. So that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. And the reason why it's a bad thing is because it demonstrates the resistance to this effort in the South. It means that only the federal government is protecting Reconstruction. As long as the federal government supports Reconstruction, supports protecting people in the South, then Reconstruction can continue. The Republican Party can hold rallies, they can vote for their candidates, they can hold office, things that are part of the political process, but only the federal government is protecting them. If for whatever reason, and we shall see that there will be reasons, the federal government, or more accurately, the northern and western states who are supporting this Reconstruction effort, if their attention or interest or desire for this begins to wane, then the efforts to thwart Reconstruction in the South will shift back to the local white population, some of which by the beginning of the 1870s are getting back their citizenship rights and so can install themselves back into political power. Okay, so that is lecture 4. I think that's all I have on that. Keep up with your reading, and lecture 5, which is the last couple chapters of Guelzo's book, will be coming soon.